Hello, I'm Matt Reardon, and thanks for watching this August 23rd West Weather Update brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. To start here, just wanted to show you the kind of rain totals from Hurricane Hilary, the remnants of that came through the western U.S. Saw a lot of heavy rainfall out of this. Flash flooding, mudslides in Southern California, the Coachella Valley, the transverse ranges. Further to the west of that, I think saw some of the worst flooding from this event. We even saw, very rare heavy rainfall amounts moving into the desert southwest, so parts of the lower Colorado River Valley, extending over in toward Imperial County in California, an area that might receive, 4, 5, or 6 inches of rain per year on an annual basis, saw as much as 1.5 inches over essentially a 2-day period. So a very rainy event there, and really extending even north of that, so into parts of Nevada that you can see there's some of these heavy rainfall amounts, even to states north of there, eastern Oregon, the Wallowa County area, parts of the elevations in the mountain ranges here in Idaho. Saw some light rain move into parts of the Snake River Valley, some heavy rain getting into parts of the San Joaquin Valley here, kind of on the southern end of the Central Valley, light rain extending further toward the north there. We did have that kind of sharp cutoff that we talked about last week here, extending toward the northwest near Monterey, but nonetheless, a very wide corridor of rainfall here from this very rare tropical storm impact to the southwestern U.S. One area that didn't see quite as much rainfall out of this, we talked about the potential possibility for this all the way last Wednesday, but the Willamette Valley, which is very dry right now, unfortunately missing out on some of the rainfall here from this event. And then I will say, kind of Saturday, as the storm got a little bit closer, it became apparent that it was speeding up a little bit quicker than forecast. I think that knocked off some of the kind of crazy extreme rainfall totals that could have been the kind of scenario that we witnessed here. But that feels like only a small silver lining, considering we did still see a number of damaging impacts from this across Southern California. Did want to kind of jump you over and take you back. This is a cool loop from NOAA and CIRA, kind of documenting the entire life of Hurricane Hilary here. I'll play this. It starts in the Eastern Pacific. Here's those kind of organizing clouds and tropical convection here, spinning up in a tropical storm Hilary, which quickly strengthened there into a powerful Category 4 hurricane here in the Eastern Pacific. If you remember, we talked about last week how when it crossed this point, it was going to get into some cooler ocean waters and weaken quickly. And you can see right there, loses a lot of that structure, but still pushing a ton of anomalous moisture up into the western U.S., dropping that heavy rainfall that we saw. Now, a lot of that rainfall fell over kind of an interior area, which is really acts as a watershed, not only for the Colorado River, some of the rainfall even getting into California, or at least the Sierra Nevadas. And it's just kind of continuing this very wet year. Started very wet, obviously, all the way over into spring or late winter. Then we had the snowmelt season, got another boost to a lot of the reservoirs here. And here comes this crazy rare event that brings even more rain into an area in a time when we typically aren't getting kind of the bulk of our water here. I want to jump over and take a look at some of these reservoir levels this year. This is Lake Mead in southern Nevada here. Reached historic lows last year that we were concerned about, but has been coming up here during the melt season on the Colorado River, nearing these 2021 levels, likely to surpass that here with some of the excess rain here from the remnants of Hilary. If we jump over further toward the northeast in Lake Powell, northern Arizona, huge melt season. Utah, we saw record snowfall earlier this year. So as that got into the system, we kind of blew past 2022 and 2021 here, and now slowly coming down in kind of a typical drawdown fashion, but likely starting at a much higher level going into the start of our next water year, which, given this kind of El Nino background state, could be another bountiful year here. So the water situation, I think, improving across the west here, despite some of these kind of short-term negative impacts from the remnants of Hilary here. Just picking on one more here, this is over in the Sierra Nevadas, Lake Melones on the Stanislaus River. The atmospheric river events, this is water falling right into the watershed here, but we also had the beneficial or bountiful snowmelt season here as that snow got into the reservoir. And then if you look in 2022 or 2021, more typically we see a quick drawdown here in summer this time of year. But because of this rainfall, not only the thunderstorms that we received earlier this summer on the crest of the Sierra Nevadas, but all the rainfall moving in with Hilary as well, we've seen a slower drawdown. So as we get into the start of the season here in November and December of our typical water year, we're starting from a much higher point than we were in 2021 and 2022 on some of these reservoir levels in California as well. So again, kind of a rosy picture going forward, and that El Nino forecast in the background. Hard to say anything for certain, this far out looking at that water year forecast, but that El Nino forecast, we'd be looking more leaning toward a rosier water situation for California and the Colorado River Basin as well. Catching us up to present day here, believe it or not, we actually are tracking another remnant of a tropical storm system here. This one, not coming from the Pacific, coming from the Atlantic. This is the remnants of Tropical Storm Harold here spinning over far western Texas, getting into southern New Mexico here. You can kind of make out on the satellite here kind of a broad counterclockwise rotation over the elevation here. This is spawning quite a bit of showers and storm activity here in eastern Arizona, southern New Mexico. That came up through Texas here overnight, moving west now into the area, likely to increase rainfall in this area here through the day today and into tomorrow as it kind of fades into the background state and brings some more moisture up into Utah and parts of western Colorado as well. But that even bringing more rainfall into the Colorado River Basin. So kind of funny, this one is on the H name as well. They're on separate name lists, so that just kind of coincidentally, Hilary being the H name in the Pacific, and then Harold, its counterpart here in the Eastern Pacific, both seem to be converging on the Western U.S. For whatever reason here. I want to jump over and look at the daytime high temperatures. This is just for today, valid as a Wednesday. We've walked back a lot of the crazy temperatures that we talked about in July, so much more seasonal weather here across August, across the western U.S. Only talking about triple digits here across the desert Southwest, mid-90s across the Central Valley, and relatively cool across the Pacific Northwest and northern interior west. If we jump back over to the Eastern Pacific, looking at the National Hurricane Center outlook here, unfortunately, yes, we are watching some more areas of potential development. It is late August, getting into September. That's kind of our peak hurricane time period for a given year. So not a surprise to see this continue, especially with that El Nino background state where we have warmer ocean temperatures in the Eastern Pacific to fuel some of these storms. So we do have some other areas that we're keeping an eye on. If we look over here at the infrared satellite loop to keep track of some of these thunderstorms, we do see kind of a broad area of increased activity, but nothing looking closer at it that has more organization or spin or development to it quite yet. They are keeping an eye on this area here specifically. Just coincidentally, this will hopefully be the last comparison I make, kind of the same area we saw Hilary spin out of on that loop earlier, but there are some key differences in the forecast here. I will make this forecast. We're looking at low-level vorticity in the atmosphere here to kind of get an idea of where these hurricanes might form if they are to get that strong. I'll take this forecast valid here into Thursday and into Friday. And where I started here on Wednesday evening filming this video, we kind of had this broad area of spin here, or this trough here in the Eastern Pacific. That was kind of that broad area of unorganized thunderstorms we saw in that infrared satellite imagery. But potentially getting into Thursday, now into Friday, and very early Saturday, potentially two systems spinning out of this, a weaker one further toward the west. Hint the lower probabilities that we saw from the National Hurricane Center, and a likelier chance of formation this weekend of that storm potentially coming out of that eastern segment there. Now, before I go this further out into the forecast, I want to say there's some pretty key differences here between whatever forms here and what we saw with Hilary. One, the forecast, as I take this into Saturday and Sunday, the expectation is this will likely, no guarantees, but likely turn into the Mexican coastline here as a potentially developing tropical storm or perhaps a weak hurricane. Flash flooding, mudslide risk there, wind impacts as well are possible. But right now, given the kind of far remote possibility that it's getting up toward the desert Southwest, want to kind of squash any comparisons here to potentially another Hilary here. I think the reason we're seeing that kind of fast turn into the Mexican coastline here, this is looking at upper level vorticity in the atmosphere. So kind of the same plot as before, but looking higher up in the atmosphere towards some of that steering flow that we talked about last week. And I'll make this forecast valid as a Thursday afternoon, as this is just kind of getting its act together here in the Eastern Pacific. If you look closely, there's kind of this broad yellow contour. This is actually a weak upper level trough that's kind of coming careening out of the West Atlantic here. And as this crosses in over Mexico proper, it's going to act kind of like a counterclockwise spiral, pulling whatever system does try to develop here into the Mexican coastline. And that's the thinking right now as to why the storm likely going to get pulled or dragged up into the coastline by this upper level low. And I'll actually show you as this occurs here, getting into Saturday. Once that upper level low gets in a bit closer proximity, that counterclockwise flow around it, pulling it into the Mexican coastline. I'll say there's still a scenario where perhaps this kind of tries to drag it out back into the Pacific, where this could develop a little bit further in the Eastern Pacific, but getting out into kind of day 5, day 6, day 7 here in the forecast. Don't want to say anything more than that. I will kind of give it the broad statement of, as we get some of these storms developing here in the Eastern Pacific, there's always that chance that even a weak one, don't want to compare it kind of any scenario to Hilary. I think that's more of a once in a generation type event, but some of these storms can push some atmospheric moisture into the desert Southwest, increasing some of that monsoon activity. So we do keep an eye on these. as we get a little bit further out into the forecast. I'm going to jump over and look at the upper level height map here. This is looking at the ECMWF forecast. I'll make this valid here as of Wednesday afternoon. If you look closely, that kind of blue contour, there's that weak Atlantic trough that's exiting kind of out of the eastern, or the western Atlantic, I should say, over Mexico that we were just talking about. The big story across the U.S. right now is certainly this big upper level ridge dominating the central U.S. This is producing a lot of heat, excessive heat warnings, and has pushed a lot of those high temperatures out of the western U.S. Into the central U.S. And we kind of have this broad troughing here with this little cutoff low west of California, and that has reduced the temperatures that we just looked at here as of Wednesday afternoon. Now, I'll take this through Wednesday, then into Thursday. We do see another little cutoff low sneaking down. This is going to merge with that one that we just talked about in California, and that's going to bring some precipitation chances up into Thursday night for parts of the Willamette Valley, perhaps eastern Oregon, far western Idaho. Not expecting anything too significant, not a drought buster by any means for the Willamette Valley, but perhaps something like a 20, 30, or 40% chance of rain and showers here in parts of the Willamette Valley. Hoping for kind of something leaning toward maybe on the more gangbuster side, but just not seeing it here as we get into Thursday and Friday. And then we still have this kind of merged upper level melt low now off the coast of Oregon. But you'll notice just since that forecast was valid as of Wednesday, now getting into Friday evening, that ridge over the central U.S. trying to kind of encroach or push its way toward the west. That's not uncommon with some of these late summer ridges. They tend to inch toward the west. And so that's going to increase temperatures this weekend across the western U.S., particularly for parts of the Pacific Northwest, but potentially also the desert Southwest as well, getting into Saturday, then into Sunday. The big story as we look out beyond that is the likely movement of this upper level trough here. We'll see in just a bit into this northwest and then the interior west here as I take this forecast from Monday into Tuesday into Wednesday. So then that trough kind of pushing into the area, likely increasing rain chances for the Pacific Northwest more confidently and bringing temperatures down as well from that weekend to warm up earlier. So I think this is good news for some moisture-starved areas in the Pacific Northwest. Likely going to get some rainfall out of this in the Willamette Valley of Oregon. That is the hope. Potentially parts of eastern Washington, eastern Oregon, the Snake River Valley, as well as this system comes through, and potentially a smaller little system coming in on the backside of this now, getting into late week. Don't want to take it too much further than that. We'll go ahead and look at the kind of 7-day forecast here. These are the temperatures valid as of today, the high temperatures. Just showed you these. Mentioned the warm-up likely getting into this weekend. So here's Thursday, getting into Friday, Saturday, Sunday, seeing those temperatures increase across the Pacific Northwest. What were maybe low hundreds across the desert Southwest, now we're talking triple-digit, low teens here in the Central Valley of California, kind of playing cool throughout this whole forecast here, staying consistent in those 90-degree temperatures here. And this is getting on all the way into Sunday, and then you'll see that cool down here Monday into Tuesday for the Pacific Northwest as that trough exits to the east, and some rainfall likely accompanying that as well. I want to show you that rainfall forecast going through. This is valid as of Wednesday evening here. There's the remnants of Harold pushing into New Mexico, increasing some of this monsoonal activity across the elevations here in the interior west. So make this forecast valid into Thursday night. There's that kind of little lobe here of that upper level low coming up through parts of western Oregon here. Just a chance now for some rainfall getting into the Willamette Valley, eastern Oregon as well. That's Thursday evening, and then getting into Friday afternoon, potentially some of that activity shifting east into eastern Oregon and western Idaho as well, and some of the mountain ranges there. Not huge amounts expected out of this, certainly not in the Willamette Valley, probably not in the Snake River Valley, but it is a chance for getting some of the rain and moisture into an area that could probably use it at this point. We have to wait all the way getting out into next week for that next weather maker. That's that trough kind of encroaching into the area, more of a definite precip maker, I think, for the Pacific Northwest. Now moving in here Tuesday night into parts of Washington, western Oregon, eastern Washington, potentially seeing some rainfall out of this as this moves through Tuesday into Wednesday. Pushing through the area, that's likely when we'll see some of that rainfall. And there's that upper level low potentially coming in even behind it, which could all the way toward next weekend potentially increase rainfall chances yet again for an area here across the Pacific Northwest and Snake River Valley. If we get 7-day rainfall totals, this from the ECMWF model as well, consistent with the forecast I just showed you, just looking at the total 7 days out through next Thursday. There's some of this rainfall expected here across parts of Oregon, western Oregon, eastern Oregon, some amounts getting in here into eastern Washington, some amounts getting in here into the Snake River Valley. Likely not seeing huge amounts here across the valley proper, and likely not seeing huge amounts here across the Willamette Valley. But it is something to kind of keep an eye on, which hopefully trends in a more positive direction here as we get closer to the event here at kind of the mid work week next week. Jumping over and looking at sea surface temperatures here, I want to touch on just a few points here. One is the developing El Nino that we've been talking about this summer. That is still strengthening here. We can see these very anomalous warm temperatures here in the far eastern Pacific. Those are kind of continuing their slow march into the central Pacific, where we establish that El Nino proper here. And that is the forecast getting into fall and then into winter of 23 and 24, that this El Nino will continue to strengthen, potentially significantly so, such that we're in a strong or even very strong El Nino getting into December or January. So that's on schedule. That's continuing. I did want to point your attention a little bit closer here. It's hard to see, but there is this cold patch of water here just at the southwest of the Baja California Peninsula. That is actually the shadow or the track or the effect of Hurricane Hilary. Developed into a major hurricane here in the eastern Pacific. A lot of those heavy winds, or high winds I should say, kind of spinning up upwelling cooler ocean water from the surface, mixing that with the warm ocean waters that were previously on the surface of the ocean here. On top of that, you have the cooler rain, relatively speaking, falling on the ocean surface as well. And we see often with these powerful hurricanes or typhoons, these kind of cold shadow from where they tracked coming before as they went up and made landfall here. So kind of neat to see that here just a few days after the event. We see the reflection here in the sea surface temperatures. Getting out into the long-range forecast here, I want to give you an update. This is the latest ECMWF weekly forecast for September. So this is looking all the way September 1st through October 1st of precipitation departures here. Kind of two things I see on this map that we've talked about kind of a lot in that late summer forecast is potential continuation of the drought here in the Pacific Northwest, and then potentially a weakened monsoon here in parts of Arizona and southeastern California. Now that forecast was kind of blown up, at least in August, from this hurricane that moved into the area. Very rare event. It's not clear really how some of these kind of hurricanes can play into those long-range forecasts. Obviously, if you get some kind of a rare event like that, kind of throws everything else out the window. And looking closer at the forecast here, we're seeing these two areas kind of highlighted, showing up again in terms of drought potential that we were talking about earlier this summer. And if I jump over and look at temperatures, I think we might see kind of some conflicting signals here a little bit. And I'll show you what I mean. So kind of the biggest signal I see here in terms of temperatures is this warm temperature over the central U.S. That's indicative of a big upper level ridge centered somewhere kind of over the 100th meridian here. Not terribly different from what we're seeing currently here on Wednesday. All the warm temperatures I just showed you here in the central U.S. and the relatively seasonal or cooler temperatures across the western U.S. In a situation like that, we'd have an upper level pattern or height pattern, something more like this, where we have lower heights or troughing over the western U.S. and upper level ridging here over the central U.S. And that jet stream pattern likely to keep temperatures a little bit cooler like they're forecast here, but I'm not totally sure we get some of the same precipitation effects. Now, it's recursive logic, right? We're looking at a precipitation forecast, we're looking at a temperature forecast, and we're kind of trying to make them consistent with one another. And I'm just not quite seeing it. And then when we look out into the long-range forecast, we're also seeing the potential development of some ridging in the Pacific, far northeast Pacific, that could at times produce some more of these cutoff flows here across the west, kind of just off the coast of California or Oregon. And that has a way of kind of funneling moisture up into the area, not dissimilar from, again, what the forecast is showing us here getting out over the next 7 days. Now, the monsoon, a little bit more variable, harder to forecast here. Again, it just takes kind of some upper level moisture plumes from a few of these tropical storms or hurricanes to really kind of throw all that out the window. Certainly we saw that with Hurricane Hilary, but even a much weaker storm that kind of meanders up into the area can produce some upper level moisture flux over this area and increase the rainfall here. Or even like we're seeing today, something coming out of the Atlantic. So harder to forecast that with confidence going forward here. But we are seeing that negative precipitation departure here from the ECMWF weeklies. If you look out into the long-range forecast here from the Climate Prediction Center, the 6 to 10-day outlook has that ridge moving to the west like we looked at earlier. There's that upper level low that's going to kind of sneak into the area here really on day 6 or 7, and then keep temperatures down here across the Pacific Northwest. Temperatures across the desert Southwest likely to rise as that ridge inches westward. Looking at the precipitation departures over that same time period, there's that kind of Tuesday, Wednesday to Thursday increased precipitation we're expecting across the Pacific Northwest, hoping to get and materialize some of that rainfall in the Willamette Valley, where folks are pretty dry there. If we look out into the 8 to 14-day temperature outlook, this is where I think there's some more questions as we kind of get past next weekend. Potential ridging developing in the Northeast Pacific, perhaps associated with some of that North Pacific warmth I showed you earlier. It's not clear if that kind of pushes or encroaches into the area. It's likely to bring much of the West back over warmer as we start September. But at least the forecast here from the Climate Prediction Center not showing much of that. A little bit of the warmth getting into parts of the Willamette Valley in Northern California, but keeping precipitation values elevated. That leads me to believe we're going to see something more like I drew earlier, where general troughing across the west, upper level ridging over the central U.S., kind of coincident with this heat here, kind of centered over the central U.S., drier conditions there as well, and potentially above average precipitation departures from much of the western U.S. So some conflicting signals in the long-range forecast, I think also in that September forecast as well. If you remember that September forecast I just showed you from the ECMWF, we were dry here across the Pacific Northwest, dry here across the monsoonal areas, and I jump over and look at the Climate Prediction Center outlook for that 8 to 14-day outlook, which is really through that first week of September, we see a broad area of above average precipitation likely there, but also that consistency here with the temperature. So some kind of interesting signals here going into September. If we jump over and look at the monthly outlook from the Climate Prediction Center, we see, again, a little bit of disagreement here. We don't see below average precipitation expected in September from the Climate Prediction Center for Oregon and Washington here. We don't see below average precipitation expected here for the desert Southwest monsoon. And then temperature pattern, perhaps some ridging here over the central or even the interior west, the Four Corners area. At times, some of that ridging can promote increased monsoonal activity, or at the very least normal monsoon activity, which is why they have normal chances for much of this area, even a slight above average chance here for the desert Southwest. So not total consistency here in the forecast. That leads me to believe that there is some variability here, less confidence going forward into that September forecast. I don't think that's bad news. Hoping to not see continued dryness here for the Pacific Northwest going forward. And then as always, these hurricanes, even typhoons in the West Pacific, hurricanes that bubble up out of the Eastern Pacific, if they're strong enough to kind of nudge, adjust the jet stream or push one of these moisture plumes over the desert Southwest, that can quickly change the forecast beyond what we were expecting long term. So we'll keep an eye on that in the meantime. Thank you all for watching. That's all I have for you today. Until next time.